Andrew Berry and the Cleveland Browns are once again set to go big game hunting in free agency. We're going to take a list of some of the top targets the Browns could potentially be interested in, see what the likelihood is the Browns could land them, and if not, maybe some names that would fit the bill. Your latest Locked On Browns, Jeff Lloyd, joined by Sports Illustrated, Pete Smith.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound LGB on the LOB, the Locked On Browns podcast, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Your host, Jeff Lloyd, at Jeff_LJ_Lloyd, joined today by Browns Digest through Sports Illustrated's Pete Smith. Going to discuss Browns' potential free agents before things get exciting and kicking off here next week. We appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen every single day, whether it is on your favorite podcast platform, always available, always free, and of course here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, notifications on. And if you have a Roku TV, go ahead and search Locked On Cleveland Sports. You will find the Locked On Browns podcast, Locked On Guardians podcast, Locked On Cavs, and the ultimate Cleveland sports show. Article come out yesterday, Mary Kay Cabot. And I don't think anybody was truly surprised by maybe the names on the list, the names mentioned that the Cleveland Browns could be pursuing here in the coming days, starting next week. I guess we can start, probably, working, from the interior backwards. In the article, it mentions a Javon Hargrave, obviously a popular fit for the Cleveland Browns, but certainly not going to come anywhere close to cheap. A surprising name, as the career turn has gotten better in Denver for Dre'Mont Jones, but he will hit the open market as well. Hargrave, you would think, at age 30, coming off an incredible season against the run as a pass rusher. If you basically have a defensive tackle room that is just completely underperforming, right off the bat, he feels like a guy that you would really, really probably, want to get into the mix. Again, the Browns will have cap space. He's going to command a ton of it. Pete, first off, is this the ideal scenario? And B, what is the likelihood the Browns can actually pull this off?
Well, looking at the market for three techniques, it's not great after you get past those top few guys. So I think Hargrave is ideal from that standpoint, but obviously it's going to be pricey, and it's probably going to affect everything else you do. Now, if you're saying that you address all your needs and Javon Hargrave is sort of the centerpiece of what you accomplished, you're probably pretty happy about that just because he addresses your biggest thing. JIm Schwartz obviously has had a ton of success with dominant three techs in his career. As far as how realistic it is, I think the Browns actually have a shot. Obviously it goes through the lens of if they're willing to pay his price, but I don't know how many teams are out there that sort of offer what the Browns do in terms of you're coming to a team that believes they can contend. You're coming to a team that obviously is going to meet your price, and you're coming to a team that Javon Hargrave has openly spoken about liking JIm Schwartz, and what that system allows him to do. So I at the very least, you're going to get a meeting, which is a big deal. So maybe there's better fits out there for him. Off the top of my head, I have a difficult time coming up with any, and that's in part because of the arms race that took place last year, where so many teams tried to really load up their rosters in hoping that they could sort of push themselves over the top.
Hargrave, of course, seems to be the dream scenario here. Again, look, it's going to take a hefty check as you're getting him off just another incredible season. The pressure certainly would be on him, and what he is going to be expected and counted on to do here, if and when this would work out between he and the Cleveland Browns. And God knows, the amount of times that Pete and I have discussed this. I mean, we could discuss defensive tackle for 6 seasons here with the Cleveland Browns, and always wondering where, the top player was going to be in that room, how they were going to improve that room. Was the, emphasis and onus even there to make it, even close to a complete room? It's just kind of been a room of dire straits here for a long, long time for the Browns. Certainly player Javon Hargrave certainly vastly improves that. And basically, the first time in a long time that room, shows it can be, something close to maybe even being considered formidable. Another name that's floating out there, and this one you always get a little bit nervous, with, obviously a great last season in Denver here for Dre'Mont Jones. And this is something we talked about. This is someone, I should say, we talked about during his draft process. But Pete, this almost kind of feels like, and almost similar to, why the Commanders are hesitant to go long-term with Daron Payne just yet is overall production and continued production. Yes, Dre'Mont Jones had a fantastic year on the terrible Denver team last year, but are we ready to, discuss this guy as, a north 15 million player, 17, 18 million dollars per year? I mean, if it comes down to, you can have, Hargrave at 20 and it doesn't work out, I don't know if we're in such a rush to just necessarily hand Dre'Mont Jones $18 million a year.
No. And, this comes back to, what do you really want to accomplish with your defense? Dre'Mont Jones is not big. And at some point you're probably going to want to protect your linebackers. He's not that guy. So it's like, if you sign Dre'Mont Jones, are you just saying JOK doesn't matter? Or are you saying that you're going to play with linebackers who are more expected to be able to take on blocks and contact and things like that? And I'm not sold on Dre'Mont Jones whatsoever in terms of being worth that type of money. He's not, like, don't get me wrong, he's been productive at points, but he's not some great player. He's okay. He's done some things that get you excited, but I don't think, there's anything that says this guy is going to transform your defense whatsoever. He's a pretty good pass rusher. He's a miserable run defender, which, seemingly that's kind of a big deal for this team. But that's the thing, is like, you can make the argument that if the offense is everything that you hope it's going to be, and you are going to be up in games, that maybe Dre'Mont Jones makes a ton of sense, that you're always going to be rushing the passer. But, that's not realistic to say that you're gonna have to be at some point in a game where you're gonna have to either come back or make a tough stop on defense or whatever. And Dre'Mont Jones has not been that player. So for what the Browns need, or what the Browns seemingly want, I just don't see where Dre'Mont Jones is a fit. But we'll see. I think it's a risky play.
All right. So if you can't make it work with Javon Hargrave, and obviously the concerns with a player like Dre'Mont Jones, who else, Pete, could possibly be a target there on the interior for Cleveland?
That's where you end up with the conversations like Sheldon Rankins and the two guys from the Saints, Shy Tuttle and David, whatever his last name is, that have done some things in their career, but obviously aren't like gonna take over. Both those players are guys who succeeded in part because they played on talented defensive fronts. They didn't need to be the top guy whatsoever. The Jets had an unending rotation. The Saints have a very talented roster there on the defensive front. And then, that leads you back to Taven Bryan. Are you perfectly happy just to bring back Taven Bryan at that point and continue to try to work that room, and believe that if you can get a credible nose and obviously a improve the other defensive end option position there, that Taven Bryan is going to be decent enough to sort of hold down the fort. Again, risky in that sense, but at the same time, if you can sort of improve your overall defense enough where Taven Bryan or Sheldon Rankins or one of these guys is sort of your weakest link, you're probably doing pretty well.
So a lot of work to be done, certainly for the Cleveland Browns, and improving this defensive tackle room. And, 3 years in, and, for the Browns themselves here, this is time where you assess yourself. What have we been looking at? What have we been focusing on that we think, will be getting somebody in here and improving the situation? And, 3 years now. Look, you're not going to hit on everything, but, you certainly would like a change of fortune here, for the Cleveland Browns and a defensive tackle room, as it's, been a struggle bus here for 3+ years as Cleveland Browns trying to assemble that room. We're going to switch it up here. We'll kick it outside to the edge here. Going to definitely in third segment get to a little bit of safety talk here for the Cleveland Browns. Your latest Locked On Browns, Jeff Lloyd, joined by Sports Illustrated's Pete Smith. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe and secure. It's super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and 3-pointers made. Plus, look, you're going to sit there. You're going to spend 2.5 hours watching a game. FanDuel gives you the opportunity to combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. Take 5-6 long shots. You don't have to put a lot of money down. If it hits, you're going to walk away with a very, very nice return. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Talking Browns free agent targets here. Sports Illustrated, Pete Smith in the house. As always, we appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen every single day. And Pete, it's funny because as far as the edge position here, and, this one, it's out there as far as, certainly a possibility. And it seems like it's been this way for 3-4 seasons now. This is a guy I loved back in the day, coming into the NFL. There were times where he's been a really, really good player. I'm just not sure what the monetary amount is for this player. And overall, it's, it's not consistent production. It's not consistent pressure from a player like Yannick Ngakoue. This is one where, I don't know necessarily how to play this. And for me, this is one where it certainly would have to come down to, dollar signs and zeros, because I'm not sure, if we're talking a $10+ million player anymore, that this is the type of guy that's going to give you the return on that investment.
Absolutely agreed. He made $13 million the past 2 years. Did less than Jadeveon Clowney combined. I mean, yes, there are sacks, but he generally not impactful, and is miserable in a lot of other areas, and just doesn't offer a whole lot. If you're talking about Yannick Ngakoue at like $4 million, yeah, sure, you can put him at that wide 9, and maybe he can cause some problems as a speed threat off the edge. But if he's potentially going to get another big deal, I don't see how you can possibly expect him to be what you need at that position. Part of that presumably would be you're signing him and saying, look, we've got Alex Wright. We're going to keep adding to that room. You're not going to be playing rundowns a whole lot. You're going to be there to rush the passer and rush the passer specifically. But even then, you're not going to want to pay full freight for what you are making into specifically a package player. Now, maybe Ngakoue is okay with that. with the idea that he will be more deployed to his strengths, but where does the money hit where he's going to be comfortable with that versus, taking a big deal from potentially a team that has a lot of money and isn't very good and needs somewhere to spend it. And Yannick Ngakoue can go there, may not win much, but will get his check.
It almost seems like maybe you're paying past real estate prices, and not necessarily getting the same property real estate player in Yannick Ngakoue. And I'm not saying his time in the NFL is done. He's still a contributor. He's still part of it. I just don't know if I view Yannick Ngakoue as a big time free agent signing anymore. And especially with the scenario you played, the Browns certainly want to get Alex Wright more looks. They certainly want to have Alex Wright, one guy who quietly was getting better towards the end of last season that not a lot of people obviously were focused on with everything else that was going on. But a player certainly on hopefully a trajectory path for improvement. Pete, other names, at the edge position. And I do think if the Browns can kind of handle some business here, I think at 42, you look at a possibility of, you could really, really add a solid player there. You could probably get an edge rusher, a guy who is on the athletic level of a Myles Garrett, a guy who foot speed could possibly be faster than Myles Garrett, but certainly something he's probably still going to address here in free agent. I keep circling back to a name like DeMarcus Walker, obviously his best season in the NFL last year down in Tennessee. JIm Schwartz, obviously a part of that staff. With DeMarcus Walker, I think you get a guy who can probably play some base end if you want him to on early downs. You can also kick him inside in nickel and dime situations. The check is not going to probably be what it would be for a player like Yannick Ngakoue. And I think the thing that, impresses me, with the prospect of a DeMarcus Walker is, defensive line versatility, is the fact he can do different roles. But if not him, what are some other names here that could possibly be done? Because it's just, for Myles, the thought and fascination was, that he and Jadeveon Clowney, it would just be this great thing. And, Jadeveon, and whether it was, towards the end of this year, obviously, in his head and aggravated and pissed off, or just the general, viewing of the fact that, Jadeveon Clowney is just not the ridiculous raw athlete that he used to be. Father Time catches up with everybody. But another name or two here that probably could fit this equation for the Browns to improve this pass rush.
I like Walker. It sounds like Tennessee is trying to make a late push to keep him.
I don't know if Tennessee knows exactly what any of their plans are right now, but that's probably in the story for another day.
Well, they're tearing it down. So what does that look like for them? Maybe Walker's somebody that can sort of help bridge that gap moving on to the next one. Samson Ekubon is certainly a popular name. You look to the Rams and you go, or 49ers or some of these other teams who are either tearing it down or just can't possibly keep everybody. Mm-hmm. He's somebody who's quick off the ball. He could potentially give you some value at defensive end. The edge rusher from the Houston Texans remains to be seen if they're going to be able to keep him. Okoronkwo, former Oklahoma kid,
yep.
Who's been super efficient as a pass rusher. But, to this point has not sort of been rewarded financially. It's sort of unclear just how valuable he is, but because every projection you see, he continues to look like a very cheap purchase, which would be great from that standpoint. So those are a couple names. Some people have thrown out Marcus Davenport. He's going to get paid, and two, injuries have held him back with the Saints, but he certainly looks the part. He's like 270 pounds, 6'5", mm-hmm. Has all those things you like, has been impactful. So I think he's going to get a big payday, and I doubt it's going to come from the Browns. Same thing with Arden Key. I think he's going to get close to what Clowney got last year, and I don't think the Browns want to pay that much for Arden Key. So Ekubon's interesting. Walker, if he's not retained, is interesting. And then Okoronkwo from the Houston Texans is certainly interesting.
There's certainly the chance here to, get some work done, some damage done here as the Browns try to hopefully get some more, depth in that room, ability to have flexibility in how you want to play guys, nickel and dime situations, get your best pass rushers on the field. You just move guys in and out. And, as we talked about here, JIm Schwartz wants to get this to, a room where, you can play 7-8 guys and play them all meaningful snaps. But it's going to take steps, to get both these rooms in the shape that you would like to give you, basically the opportunity to do just that. Certainly, safety class is interesting. There is big ticket item. There's maybe a little bit less than big ticket item. There is mid items here. We're going to continue little bit of free agency primer here before things get crazy here next week. Your latest Locked On Browns, your host, Jeff Lloyd, Sports Illustrated's Pete Smith, along for the ride. Now, with the safety position, and, look, the Jessie Bates, yes, it's a popular fit here. Yes, the same age and David Mulugeta as to Deshaun Watson, all of that fits, obviously. If you want to say the premise of maybe Jessie Bates was more of a dream scenario as a safety for the Cleveland Browns with Joe Woods at defense coordinator, as opposed to maybe JIm Schwartz, the name Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. And he was spoken a lot. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was spoken about a lot on Locked On Browns and during, his draft, because, whatever, I guess, the issues were off the field, there wasn't a question about it on the field. The guy was just a straight up player. And you've seen that certainly in his time with the New Orleans Saints, certainly his time with the Philadelphia Eagles. He's versatile. For the Browns, he can do a number of things if they ask him to. So my guess here, and I don't even know which one would end up garnering more money, because if you look at the overall package of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and not a slight on Jessie Bates in any way, it's just that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson can just do so many different things. But Pete, couple of thoughts on that guy, on those guys. If somebody, if something works for one of them here, maybe as opposed to the other.
Well, look here again. You're getting in the door with Jessie Bates, which is good.
Yeah, if they want Jessie Bates, they already know their answer. Most likely, they already know their answer.
But look,
it's either yes or no, and they probably know.
It's going to be expensive. So that may be too much. The market will dictate on that, where he's going to end up. When it comes to Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, he is versatile, but there's no question where he's been at his best in his career, and that's a slot position, not free safety. So that's really the question I would have. If the Browns are looking at Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as a free safety, he can do it. Certainly he got a lot of ball production this past year, but their safeties weren't great in coverage. But as a slot defender, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is one of the biggest pricks in the NFL. And although it hasn't been as bad as it was, he has a stellar track record of getting people to punch themselves out of games because he gets underneath their skin so much. But he's just physical near the line of scrimmage. He can blitz. He can play the run. And look, the Browns need somebody who's going to be physical from that position, because they can't just concede that, or they're going to have to design their defense in a way to protect whoever's in that nickel area to try to avoid getting gashed there. So if that's the thought process, that they're going to put Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in the slot, I'm all for it. And then obviously they would still need something else at free safety.
Exactly.
Which at that point is interesting. Duron Harmon certainly is a guy I think makes a lot of sense. I don't think he's going to cost a lot of money. So yeah, it so much depends on what do they see Chauncey Gardner-Johnson doing in this defense. I would hope it's the slot and really upgrade that unit and give themselves one of the best coverage units in the league.
And, it does bring up, questions, obviously, as far as, the rest of the Browns cornerbacks. But, I think in a situation like that, you bring in a player like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to the fold, you'll feel free to let whatever work out is ever, however it's going to work out, because just a massive, massive upgrade and just a tremendous player, great ball skills. And, obviously, Pete and you guys always know how much, we love basically the absolute, bully jerk mentality of defensive backs. Pete, but then you kind of get down, basically from the top of the list. And, I don't know who put it out there yesterday, but, it's a deep class. Maybe that will, bring down the numbers some. Not so sure on that one, guys. Got to be completely honest with you. But continuing with the path here, Pete, if they can't make it happen with either of these guys, whether dollars wise or, of course, situation wise, you get to the Juan Thornhills and those types here. But the Browns cannot just go in with pick 42 and pick 98 and think they're going to be able to resolve this issue. It's got to be somebody, with a proven track record here.
Yeah, look, I mean, they need guys who can come in and do a job. I mean, they've obviously drafted enough guys that are sort of developing. They need guys like, you look at their defensive line, for example. They have one starter and decent depth. They need the other three starters. So they need to get guys who can come in and play. Same thing for safety, same thing for Mike linebacker. And if they want to handle slot that way, then they need to do that. They have the pieces in place, and they don't really have time to wait around for guys to sort of figure it out.
Certainly interesting. I'm just going to go with this one here. Obviously, a little bit off the topic here, but a little bit of the, Browns free agency, keeping their own business here. Pete, Browns were content to give Nick Harris his opportunity in 2023. We all know the story. We know all basically how, the year went for Nick Harris. And it's going to be weird because you don't always have a big center market, but it's starting to look like it could be a pretty good center market this year in free agency. The thinking would be is obviously, with, the money, still committed to the four other starters. And if you were ready to do this in 2023, are you ready now to, if you're ready to do it in 2022, are you ready now to do it in 2023? A lot of superlatives for Nick Harris, not played much. Obviously, he was the first string center in practice his first 2 years in the league. You think it's safe to say, for the team and for his success, that, you can go ahead and just give Nick Harris this final year on his rookie deal and, kind of make, your decision on where you're going to be going with that in 2024? Is, Nick Harris, does he deserve this shot, or are they, looking for potential legit competition for Nick?
Well, first and foremost, they've got to have a pretty good sense of where his knee is from the ACL, which is going to give them a good deal of insight as to what they need to do. The question you have to ask is, when they drafted Nick Harris, they were more of a, zone. Not that they're I don't expect them to go away from the wide zone, but under center zone team. Does the prospect of playing for more gun change how they want that position to play? Do they want somebody bigger? Difficult to know. I would expect that that they're fine with Harris for the most part. And then the last part of this whole thing is, they were ready to start Nick Harris. Ethan Posick goes in there and plays great. How much of that was a genuine shock, and how much of that was he did well, but we actually thought Harris would play at a similar level? If they were, expecting Harris to play at that kind of level, then they should be perfectly fine with going to it. Now, that doesn't mean they shouldn't. Obviously, they've got to fill out the rest of the position, but do they need to go out and get another starter? Again, that comes back to where are they on the knee? If his knee is good and they feel really comfortable with it, he's going to have a couple more months to finish rehab and get some, presumably, if everything goes well, get some time to sort of work out normally before they get into camp and stuff. I see no reason they shouldn't like Nick Harris, but it really just comes down to preference.
And it does create a little bit of an awkward situation there, though, because, potentially your top second option, backup option to Nick Harris is basically going through the same thing. So certainly, it's not an ideal scenario where if you say, oh, well, either one of these guys would be our center, and knowing both guys are, going, are coming back from ACL, reconstruction rehab. Not an ideal scenario, but I'm certainly not the first time I'm sure an NFL team has been faced with something of that nature. So we got to a bunch here today. Obviously, with next week, waiting in the wings, and it'll be here sooner. It'll be here, as soon as anybody is ready for it. It just goes so quickly. Thoughts here on the Browns, free agent wise, the defensive tackle position, the edge position, options at the safety position. I'm sure we'll get an announcement here shortly, about, basically, what everybody knows is obviously where the Browns are going to, come up with a ton of cap room here, over the next couple of days here, and opening up to be big time spenders starting next week as the new league year commences in the NFL as we switch from 2022 to 2023. He is Pete Smith, Browns Digest. Make sure you're checking everything out over there. Pete and his team do a phenomenal job, regardless in season, out of season, free agency, draft coverage. Browns Digest got everything you need. Make sure you're following @_Pete Smith _ myself @Jeff_LJ_Lloyd. The show @Locked On Browns, follow back account. Appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen, whether it's your favorite podcast platform. Make sure we are always available. We are always free, of course, here on YouTube. Subscribe, notifications on. And if you got Roku, go ahead and search Locked On Cleveland Sports. You will find the Locked On Browns podcast. Guardians, Cavs, obviously good times right now for the Cavs. Guardians prepping for the beginning of baseball season in late March, and also the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, available Monday through Friday, 11 to 1. Make sure you're checking all that out. Appreciate you all for being along for the ride. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. LGB on the LOB. Let's go Browns.